question of English vowels and their characteristics. What's your job? I'm a teacher, somebody might say. Not a native speaker of English. We don't say teacher. Why not? What does a native speaker of English say? I'm a teacher. I'm a teacher. Or, if the native speaker is American, or I'm a teacher. I'm a teacher. But neither of us says teacher. That's a long vowel in the first syllable of teacher. You might expect it, therefore, to be pronounced long, teacher. And speakers of Finnish or Czech or other languages that have good, reliable long vowels that are always long naturally expect English to behave in the same way. But we don't. Because in English we have these principles governing vowel duration, principles that depend upon the surrounding sounds. The most important of these principles is what I call Pre-Fortis clipping. Now the term fortis here really means voiceless. It tells us that vowels before a fortis consonant, a voiceless consonant, undergo reduction in their duration. You can hear this if we compare the word ride, 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 which is normal length, with right, 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 ride, right, save, safe, knees, niece, badge, batch. So the effect of this voiceless fortis consonant is to accelerate the vowel and speed it up. Why don't we call this shortening? Well, because of the confusion that arises with short vowels like the I of rich as against the E of reach. So we don't want to call it shortening. Gibson calls it reduction. This is another bad word because most people, when they speak of vowel reduction, mean changing to schwa, or the kind of thing that happens in unstressed syllables in various languages. So we have for the last 20 years been calling it clipping as the best term to avoid those confusions. Notice that when the following consonant is voiced, lenis, then clipping doesn't occur. If we take the word say and compare save, well, it's a little bit shorter in save because you've got to fit the consonant in, but it's not much shorter. It's when we come to safe that we get this abrupt reduction. Pre-Fortis clipping. Here's some more. A cart. A card. Bag. Bag. Rich. Ridge. Now, it's much more noticeable with long vowels than it is with short vowels, naturally, because long vowels have got more extent to play with. It's also more noticeable with close vowels, high vowels, than with open vowels. So in beat, as against bead, we can hear it perhaps more easily than we can in cart, as against card. Nevertheless, it is present there, and it is present in all of those pairs, as you could very easily check by doing acoustic measurements of the vowel. If you do laboratory measurements of the duration of the voiced parts of these words, it's very obvious what the difference is. It's also true that to some extent this tendency is universal, found in all languages. What seems to have happened in English is that we've taken a universal tendency and exaggerated it. Because in English it's exaggerated compared with many other languages. it's also clear that we have exaggerated it in a sense when we compare various different local accents of English, not all of which behave in the same way. And in Scottish English, for example, you tend to get clipping before D, which is not at all English English. So the word which I pronounce as need, what you need, Scottish English says what you need. Okay, that's one effect of the phonetic environment. But there's also another effect of the phonetic environment, and that's what we call rhythmic clipping. Now, English rhythm is, as you know, based upon stress, upon the tendency towards the regular beats on stressed syllables. This means that unstressed syllables have to fit in between the beats. This also means that if there are a lot of unstressed syllables to fit in, they have to squash the stressed syllables. If we've got a regular rhythm established, we come to the word man. It has an entire beat for itself. Who's that man? But compare that with manage. How can we manage? We've got to fit in manage into the same space as was occupied by man. Go and see the management. Management. You've got to fit in all of that. So the at vowel has to be clipped, has to be squashed to fit in. What are you going to read? Read. Read. Think about the reader. Think about the reader. Reader. What's the readership? What's the readership? Read, reader, readership. We have to fit in more and more unstressed syllables, therefore the stressed syllable gets clipped. Well, that's a fairly sort of self-evident consequence of the nature of English stress. It's not, by the way, a kind of iron mathematical rule. It's a tendency. We do, you know, we're flexible. We can allow a little bit more space for a stress group that involves a lot of syllables. Nevertheless, this is the way in which we preserve this stress type rhythm. Well now, if we go back to the word teacher, you can see that the E vowel there is affected by both of those principles. The E is followed by a Fortis consonant, ch, therefore gets Pre-Fortis clipped. Teach. It's also followed by an unstressed vowel, the at the end of teacher, so it gets rhythmic clipped. So both of these principles come into play, and cumulatively they cause the E of teacher really to be phonetically not very long at all, considerably clipped teacher in terms of the number of milliseconds. Well, the principle is clear enough. The practice, as always, is something more complicated. There's another example on the handout, which is the word usefulness. And again, you can see why usefulness has an oo vowel that is really quite short in its duration. It's affected by Pre-Fortis clipping, the its of use, and by the rhythmic clipping, the need to fit in fullness. Usefulness. Usefulness. Well, you might ask then, why do we continue to used a notation of length marks, since phonetically there's really not much duration there. Well, indeed, you could use a so-called narrow transcription, an allophonic transcription, in which you didn't integrate that. It does raise certain problems. How do we show the corresponding shorteners with diphthongs? How do we show that face has the same duration as the E of teach? So you would have to introduce some extra special diacritic to show that shortness, which isn't easy. But the more important and more serious reason is that from the native speaker's point of view, this is still the same vowel. Putting it technically, this is still an allophone of the phoneme E. It's just the kind of E that we use in this phonetic position for a Fortis consonant and unstressed vowels. So we're not changing the phoneme, and our notation is essentially a phonemic notation, which is what corresponds to the native speaker's intuition, common sense about which vowel is which. One further point to observe here, syllabification. Now, people have different views about how to break English words up into syllables, but whatever view you have, please note that in words like teacher, the effect of the ch on the vowel before it still applies. We don't divide this as t, ch, in a way that would prevent the ch from affecting the duration of the E. My view is that the syllables here are like the morphology, teach and Whether you accept that view or not, please note you do get Pre-Fortis clipping in words like teacher. Just as much as in a name like Peter, where there's no morpheme boundary. Here there is a morpheme boundary that tells you that the is a suffix, but the morphology doesn't cause any difference. If there were a morpheme break between the E and the following consonant, as in a teacup or teapot, then you would not get the clipping, Pre-Fortis clipping effect. A fee-paying school. We don't say a fee-paying school, but a fee-paying. But if it's all one word,